when I reflect back on being a rambunctious kind of a kid. Had it not been for Anderson High School, there's a great likelihood that I would not have graduated from high school. I remember growing up, I was pretty active, I was pretty curious, and some people would say I was pretty mischievous. I had attended Johnson High School for most of my high school career, and in some of my activities, Johnson High School kind of felt like I didn't fit in for some reason. So I went to Anderson, and I'm extremely grateful that Mr. Gaines and some of the teachers and the staff embraced that I was a pretty active African-American male. And so they were able to kind of embrace me and understand that in many cases, it wasn't so much that I was a really bad kid as much as they embraced that there were some cultural differences that they could embrace at Anderson that maybe would have been overlooked at Johnston. No, I didn't do any sports at Anderson. I wished I had. And the reason I say I wished I had, I actually played football, basketball, and ran track, and those were some of my skills in addition to that playing baseball. But the reason I wish that I had played football or basketball or ran track at Anderson was because of their coaching staff. I remember after I got out of high school, I graduated from Anderson the last year, 1971. I was fortunate enough to receive a scholarship to the University of Houston. Prior to going there, I wanted to make sure that I was prepared for it, so I went to Mr. Ewing. And most of us know Mr. Ewing. I'd say he was probably the very best track coach that I've ever met in my life. And so he gave me some tips, he gave me some pointers. So when I got to the University of Houston, I remember talking with some of the guys that I played ball with, and they were asking me, where are you from? Where'd you go to school? Where'd you graduate? And I told them I graduated from Austin Anderson High School. And they said to me, oh yeah, I remember, man, you must be pretty good, because we remember those bald head guys, man. Yeah, they'd show up on the track, and those bald head guys, and they'd come and they'd turn it out. And that was because Anderson had folk like Mr. Timmons. They had people like Mr. Ewing, Coach Ewing. So I kind of wished I had. I think about the John Harveys. I think about the Tommy Greggs. I think about the Emmett Thompsons. I think about the Clyde Glossons. Clyde. And I think about some of those guys. And when I looked at some of the guys that I was playing ball with at University of Houston, I realized just what kind of a class of individuals they were. And they were extremely gifted. Tommy Gregg, those kind of guys. Well, let me compare it to my relationship with other teachers and how that helped me. And then I'll transition into what I think about the relationship with teachers today. I remember at Johnson when I was a sophomore, I actually got put out of my English class. And I got put out of my English class, and people might think this is absurd. I was put out of my English class because I aced a test. I know that sounds weird and sounds peculiar, but I had this thing where I was entertaining. So the first week of class, I was entertaining in the class, and the teacher was frustrated with my antics. And we took a test. And when we took the test, she asked the person next to me to grade the test. So we kind of exchanged it, that sort of thing. And when they graded the test, we passed them back, and she asked, well, how many people didn't miss any? Nobody raised their hands. How many people only missed one? I raised my hand. And she said, boy, put your hand down. And so the person who graded my test verified that I had passed the test. I say, and then when she noticed that my antics were not because I was an uninformed or uneducated kid, not that I wasn't learned. She realized then that it wasn't because I wasn't educated, it was because I was a little bit challenging. So as a result of that, she gave me this pink slip and told me to take it to the counselor because she realized that we weren't going to get along. I think what she may have thought at that time was that I was a kid that was mischievous and just had not acquired any level of education based on my merits or based on my ability to learn. And when she discovered that that wasn't the case, she realized that she couldn't deal with me and didn't want to deal with me. I didn't experience that when I was at Anderson. What I experienced at Anderson was that the teachers that I had, they weren't surprised when I did well. The teachers I had at Anderson expected me to do well. And so what they would do is in those expectations, they would encourage me, as they did other students, because they expected us to do well. In some of the other experiences I had when not at Anderson, that wasn't the case. I think that when we look back at our teachers, those teachers were very qualified. Those teachers were very competent. When we look back at those teachers were very compassionate. Those teachers understood our culture. And so I think that was a part of my success, is that they could relate to who I was as a student and as an African American student. They were proud that I was an African American student, while others challenged me being so. So I think that was instrumental in me wanting to learn. I believe that was instrumental in me continuing to pursue my education, even at times when I didn't want to. How does that relate to I think teachers now? I've been so far removed from what's going on in the educational system. My daughter's grown, and I've got a granddaughter that I'm starting to, spend a lot more time with. But I think now where we are is, I think our education system has evolved from a system where the teachers take a great deal of pride in educating and teaching, to now it's a system where they just want to move you on. Okay, whether you've learned or not, not all, but in some cases, they just want to move you on. I think one of the challenges with our educational system, especially as it relates to African American kids, there's a reason that we have such a tremendous dropout rate for African American kids. There's a reason we have a tremendous dropout rate for African American male kids. And I think it's that disconnect. I think it's that disconnect to where the teachers were genuinely concerned about you learning. I think it's that disconnect to where the teachers had relationship with the parents. I don't think we have much of that these days. Okay, I think there's a disconnect where the parents have a relationship with the teachers. And I say that to say that nowadays, I don't see the parents actually reaching out as much as parents used to reach out. I don't see where, in my scenario, I knew that if I didn't perform, people like Mr. Gaines and people like Coach Ewing and some of those Coach Britton, they knew my mom and my dad. And if something was going on with me, they had carte blanche just to go talk to my parents. So I think we missed that. I think that's a part of our culture that we have missed. So how do I compare that then to now? I would say, I think, Bruce, when it comes to Anderson and some of our African American schools that have closed, I think the movement in the 60s and the 70s, civil rights movement, was good. I just think we had a disconnect when it came to implementing it. I think that we should have been able to have the same quality of education, the same quality of accommodations, and the same quality of classroom equipments without having to emulate. We didn't have to go to their schools to get what they had. I think we could have had, we didn't have to send our teachers to their schools because we had good qualified teachers. I think what we could have done was insisted that whatever they had that enhanced their ability to learn and teach their children, we could have done those same things in our schools. Anderson was filled with life. I would say that Anderson reflects times of joy. I would say that Anderson had students who were excited about their culture, about their school, about their heritage. I would say that it would be a place where an African American, male, female, could be proud of. I would say that there's a great history in Anderson. Some of the greatest athletes that I have ever met came out of Anderson. Some of the most studious people in academia came out of Anderson. Great teachers came out of Anderson. Great administrators came out of Anderson. Great community servants came out of Anderson. I would say that it would be an experience that had you gone through or even interacted with Anderson, that you could smile. And then also there are those who were on the other side of the track, as they would say, that respects the culture of Anderson and some of the accomplishments and achievements of Anderson. I would just say, for somebody I had just met, I would say to them, L.C. Anderson High School is a wonderful legacy. My most memorable moment at Anderson High School, I would say it was our senior day, and our colors were lavender and white. And I remember asking my mother to make me a lavender jumpsuit with the shoulders out and a kind of a white flannel kind of a shirt with the big collar. You know, we're talking the 70s, right? With white platform shoes, a white straw hat. I went out and my grandfather gave me a white, what they call those things, corncob pipe. No, it was brown. I painted it white. And then my father was in business, so he had a briefcase that was kind of a baby blue. I spray painted it white. And I went to school on senior day with my lavender and white, and I thought I was all that and a bag of chips. So I would say that's probably one of my most memorable occasions. I would also say the day I graduated was an extremely memorable occasion, because for me, getting through that transition in my life was challenging. And had it not been for those at Anderson embracing me, the teachers, Mr. Gaines, the administration, the student body, the student body, I might not have made it, okay, or my high school days may have been prolonged. So I would have to say that that's quite memorable for me. It encompasses all that Anderson is about, and it encompasses all that Anderson brought to the community. At that time, I think I was somewhat remorseful, but I was so young and had not made the association of what that really meant. I hadn't made the association that the closing of the school, but keeping the name, and in that transition, it really meant, and I discovered later, that it was the closing of a culture, the closing of a history. I did not realize at that time that it meant all the trophies and the accomplishments that the athletic department had done, all of the essays that the schools had won, and some of the academia or academic achievements. I didn't realize at that time the significance of how that would later in life start to disperse. So I would have to say at that point, honestly, I was glad to get out of school, but I didn't realize until later the devastation that it would have on the history and on the culture of our community. You know, when I look at my family, my father's family were educators. They were teachers. My aunts were teachers. We just lost my aunt, Miss Brown, who was a math teacher at Kealing. We lost my other aunt a few years ago, who was a physical education teacher. So they were teachers. My mother, an educator. My brother, an educator, has his PhD in education administration. My sister is an educator. So my mother's side, my father's side of the family were educators. My mother's side of the family were business people. My uncle, most people know him, Bubba Stewart, Roosevelt Stewart, has had a barbershop on Rosewood for, it seemed like as long as Rosewood had been Rosewood. And then his brother, James, King James, they've always been in some kind of a business. And my aunts were also in business. What I remember about East Austin was, even though I grew up here on Meander Drive, which is East Austin, but was at that time pretty separated from the business community. Because when we talk about the business community of East Austin, we're talking about Rosewood Avenue, we're talking about 11th Street, we're talking about 12th Street, the White Swan, we're talking about Yake's Drugstore, we're talking about Harlem's Theater, we're talking about I'm trying to think of the name of the diner that was a soul food diner. All of those places. Southern Dinette, I think it was called, okay? And I say on the business side because I remember when we were young, my grandmother would prepare for us homemade pies. And we would solicit those pies at 10 cents a piece. And she'd put about 20 pies in a cardboard box. And I'm grateful for the businesses of East Austin because they were our patrons. We would take those pies and we would go to East 11th Street, we would go to Rosewood Park, and we would walk there and we would actually sell the pies to the businesses, the local businesses. So those businesses really did help my grandmother to take care of us. I remember trying to think, there was a gentleman who had an old shoe store. You know, that's interesting you'd ask me that, because when I look now at our communities and I start to see some of the mentoring that we lack, I remember that it was my grandfather or it was somebody's grandfather or somebody else's father that taught us how to cut yards, that taught us how to do carpentry. So when I look at the businesses of East Austin, we always had mentoring of some sort, and that mentoring was designed to make us or assist us in being self-sufficient. I'm not seeing as much of that these days. So the businesses, as they begin to disappear, I'm challenged by what's the next step. If we're not teaching our young people how to sustain in business, then we find ourselves, Bruce, being subservient to those who do. I say this carefully, but with conviction. I'm in ministry now, and since we're talking about business, And I've researched Afrocentric theology, and I've researched Eurocentric theology. And since we're talking about business, I've watched our businesses in East Austin evaporate. And as they evaporate, as I repeat myself, we have become dependent and codependent on those who have businesses. But when I look at Eurocentric theology and I begin to evaluate the prayers of the pastors, often I hear our Afrocentric pastors, when we speak of prosperity for our people, for the most part, it's getting them jobs, getting them promotions on their jobs. When I hear Eurocentric theology and pastors are praying for prosperity of their congregations, it's ideas and concepts for business. So until we start thinking along the realms of becoming owners and not tenants, until we start thinking along the realm of becoming producers and not solely consumers, we will continue to see the evaporation of our businesses as we've noticed or witnessed these last few years or these last few decades here in Austin. When we had businesses, as I mentioned, my grandmother would make the pies. We would sell the pies. So that means the business owners were purchasing. They would in turn give us the 10 cents and give us the $1. And then we would take the $1 to the Harlem Theater. And then Miss Josephine, who was with the Harlem Theater at the time, when she wasn't feeling well, she'd take the $1 to Yates drugstore, or she would take the $1 down the street. And so it stayed in the community, and the community continued to prosper. I just think that the minute that we stay job focused and we don't think about businesses, then we're going to remain codependent. Yeah, jobs and justice, that's great, and we got welfare. What we didn't ask for were the resources to sustain our community through helping to develop and build our businesses. So I think the concept of equality, great concept. I just think the implementation, we could have taken a different route. And I think that affected Anderson High School. I think that affected the businesses on East 11th Street, 12th Street. I think it affected all of that because maybe we could have implemented it a little differently. And if we had done that a little differently, maybe we could have saved the Anderson High Schools around our country. We didn't have to close our schools to get the equal educations that we needed to get. Just like we didn't necessarily have to move into their neighborhoods to get good quality housing. We could have insisted that that be placed in our own communities. And when we did that, Bruce, in my opinion, okay, like folks say, you know what that's all about. In my opinion, instead of implementation, we had a simulation. And when we had the simulation, instead of implementation into getting what we could have placed in our own communities, we lost a lot, I think, of association, and we lost a lot of identification. We didn't have to jump off the train, okay, because we were coming to the stop. We could have waited for the train to stop and reboard it. What we decided to do was jump off the train. And I think that we could have had businesses and a community that would thrive had we placed a value that says maybe there's some things we're missing, but we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I kind of think in some cases we did that.